This week on the Powell Not Found Podcast, we're talking about the newest installment. Let's take that again one more time. 3, 2, 1. This week on the Powell Not Found Podcast, we're talking about the newest installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America, Brave New World, starring Anthony Mackie, Harrison Ford. You may have heard of it. You may have seen it. And plus, coming up, the 97th annual Oscar Academy Awards are coming down the pike, so I figured why not? Let's talk about them. Let's talk about the ceremony itself, and let's make some predictions, even though we haven't seen nearly enough movies to do so. Coming up next on this week's show, here we go. Let's hit it. And that take was a lot better than the first take. Here we go.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl who loves gin. National pandemic seized her birthday celebration. Although she knew it was coming, we tried not to tell her. She brewed some Irish breakfast. Did she knew her birthday was getting corona?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 55 of the Powell Not Found Podcast, here with your host, Mark Powell, for the week of February 28th, 2025. Hopefully, everybody, his year is going well. Man, this year feels like it's going really, really fast. We're already 2 months in, and we are gearing up for a baseball season to begin. The weather's getting nicer. I want to go outside. I'm feeling the push and pull of trying to cover content while wanting to just go on a bike ride for ages and feel the wind whipping through my hair, feel the wind in my locks. As the weather gets nicer, it's just more compelling to go outside. Like, you don't want to be stuck in a theater in these beautiful days. But with that said, last night I got the opportunity to see the latest installment in the cinematic universe, which was Captain America: Brave New World. And granted, I saw it on a Thursday night. It was the theater was not full. It was a little bit empty. And if that tells you anything, then if that tells you anything, gives you any kind of indication about what kind of show it was going to be, then, man, did it feel like it got slammed by the critics and people kind of responded with their wallet and didn't show up because it was empty. It was a private experience for myself, but yeah, it was a little bit empty. And I'm getting a chat here from B+99. The Marvels is a better movie than Captain America 4. Yeah, I kind of tend to agree. It was not good. I went with the experience of trying to keep an open mind because my head's been down when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe for seemingly a decade, right? I remember going to going to the theaters and stuff and seeing these movies all the time. I remember, obviously in the very beginning when Iron Man came out, and it's and seeing all these things over and over and over again, but it just, when I left the theater, the overwhelming experience was, man, this movie was kind of bland, right? It lacked the fun that the Marvel movies usually have, right? It lacked the charisma that the Marvel movies usually had with their cast of characters. And recently, I just saw Age of Ultron, and it still kind of had a little bit of that magic, right? The quips were kind of coming back and forth. There's obviously huge spectacle that comes with these movies, and you're definitely going to get that in this movie. It definitely follows the beats, as if someone kind of created like an AI formula for a Marvel movie, and kind of followed the script and said, okay, we're going to need one of the characters fighting another character. We're going to need, a huge kind of set piece destruction kind of scene. It's definitely following those beats, but it just doesn't kind of pick you up as a viewer in any of those ways. This is a movie that's directed by Julius Ono, who is from Arlington, Virginia, went to NYU School of Film, according to his kind of bio. And it obviously stars Anthony Mackie and Harrison Ford and, and you know, that kind of all-star cast. But even the charisma of Harrison Ford, I feel like can't bring this movie to the fore. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things that's a little bit disappointing because I went there specifically to see Harrison Ford in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I thought that was actually kind of a quick hook for me to see him in one of these movies and see how he kind of portrayed a character and see how he kind of fit in. And he definitely kind of falls right into the mold. He plays the same character that I feel like Harrison Ford has been playing for about 25 years, which is a cantankerous kind of old man character for the last 20 years. And he is he definitely doesn't stray far from the mark in terms of this installment in this movie. That being said, it still is engaging. It's just there is a lot too that it expects of you, and also it doesn't feel very much like a Captain America movie in of itself. They make a lot of references to old movies, and they did have cameos that were kind of confusing if you hadn't had a big history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe for 20 years. There's a lot of throwbacks to the Edward Norton Hulk movie, which was the second installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that is very, 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 very old reference. And I can't think of a movie franchise that asks you to have that much historical knowledge of their history than this franchise is doing to some of its viewers now, right? It really felt like as I was leaving the theater, it felt like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is begging for a reboot at this point, because what other movie franchise asks that of you? We're approaching a territory where you're going to have to take a test in order to understand just some of the plot points and some of the things that they're referencing. What I'm talking about is that there's a lot of references to Liv Tyler's character from the Ed Norton film, and she kind of comes back. But if you don't have that historical knowledge, you're like, what is this character? Even myself my head being down for 10 years and not, and Bucky coming back, I'm like, isn't this the enemy from Winter Soldier? It really feels like you have to kind of sit down, have an isolated, 3-week vacation just to kind of go through all of the actual spin-offs and the movies and the episodes and the things that you need to kind of catch up on in order to really feel like you're intertwined and really in the know with this franchise anymore. And they rely a lot on those things in order to kind of pull on your heartstrings, but it doesn't work because I feel like it's just been too much time, right? The investment is no longer there in some of these older characters 20 years down the line. You have a new set of viewers that either have gone back and watched those old movies or, in our case, there were a couple, as a family with young kids in front of me. Those kids are not going to know those references. I mean, those movies came out in 2009, right? So it's interesting choices from the director and also interesting choices in tone that I thought coming out of it. It was the least fun Marvel movie I've watched in a long, long time. It didn't feel like a comic book. It felt like it hinged on drama from the very conceit of the movie, of the president being involved and the president under attack and all this kind of stuff that Captain America had to deal with. It kind of felt like it carried a heaviness throughout the film that was only punctuated by certain jokes going down the line, but it didn't necessarily make you feel light. It didn't make you feel like you were watching a theme park ride, as Martin Scorsese, called it one of those times. It was just kind of, it felt a little bit dragged down by the mire of the situation of what was happening with, the experimentation with the super soldiers, the agony of Anthony Mackie's character constantly comparing himself to Steve Rogers. It felt just like it kind of dragged you down. Whenever it tried to pull you back up, it just dragged you back down into the drama. And I don't know if people tend to go to Marvel films for that feeling. I think they go for this kind of escapist theme park ride. They go for the spectacle. They go for the fun. They go for Tony Stark's quips that his sardonic view on life, right? As this Infinity Saga, multiverse saga has continued to go on, the darker tone has seemed to play more of a role in some of these films going forward, and it definitely sunk its teeth into this one and dragged it down. And I think that might explain why it's not getting as good of reviews than it could have, right? And then comes the villain of this particular movie. And again, I fully admit that I have been pleasantly absent from some of the spin-offs of this movie, of spin-offs of the Marvel Universe, and some of the shows that fill in the details that the movies just can't possibly get to at this point. But Captain America, faces a villain in the very front who is played by Giancarlo Esposito, who played Gus Fring on Breaking Bad, and it's really hard to separate Giancarlo Esposito at this point from some of these memorable characters. Just like it's hard to separate Harrison Ford and think of him as the president, because you're looking at him going, that's Harrison Ford. He's too known. He's too much of a celebrity at this point. That they might have done better if they had an unknown actor play the main one of the main villains. And he fights, he has his fights and his spectacle and battles against Giancarlo Esposito's character. But the main villain of this movie is revealed later, and this is pretty much in, spoiler alert if you don't want to get spoiled on the main villain, but the main villain is played by a character called Samuel Stearns, who plays the Marvel character The Leader. Now, I have a picture of The Leader here, and I'm bringing this up for a point here. Let me see if I can get this picture up, because I had to look up who The Leader was, because when he's presented in this movie, he is presented in a way that makes you think that viewers are going to know who this is, as if it's the Joker from the Batman, as if it's Lex Luthor from Superman. When he's presented, I kind of had to do a double take a little bit, going, are we for real at this point? Have we reached the boundary of the outer fringes of Marvel characters? Or is this character fairly well known and maybe I'm just not in the know? And I'll leave it up to you guys to tell me. But this is just a simple Google search of The Leader. And you can see here the nerd has like a quick picture here of the Leader plus the characterization in the movie in Brave New World. Seems like he had gamma ray exposure and his brain got very, very large. He assisted the president in this movie. And his biggest superpower at this point is just knowledge. And I feel like at this point, we've really reached the apex of bad writing in the Marvel universe. I mean, I know math as a superpower can scare away a lot of American demographics, because education always seems to be something scary in this country. but trying to scare away Captain America and his strength using statistics and probability just seems like we've gotten to a point where, again, the Marvel Universe needs to reboot and reboot hard. It just seems like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel with this particular villain. I did not know him. If you did know him, just let me know in the comments. If this is apparently it's supposed to be a Hulk centric villain, which seems like this movie always had 2 feet in 2 different movies. They were a Captain America movie, but they were talking a lot about the Hulk. And again, it still feels like all these movies are no longer really story centric, very focused on one character. It seems like the Avengers blew it wide open and they can't refocus. They can't, dial in the aperture a little bit when it comes to keeping a very refined story focused on one character. They always have to bring in a lot of these cameos or these other references to other movies, which really just makes it another Avengers movie in a lot of different ways. I want to read you this is really quick here. This is, sorry, I lost my place here. So the funny thing about this movie, and again, I've said it a number of times in this different review, is that it feels like the Marvel Universe is begging for a reboot. And ironically, in the beginning of this movie, it's the trailer for the Fantastic Four reboot is right before this, right? And it's shown in a very, very different way. If you've ever played any of the Fallout games, the way that they're presenting the new Fantastic Four has that kind of vibe to it. Like every beginning of every Fallout game feels like it's a 1950s kind of stuck in the 1950s kind of TV commercial kind of style. And that franchise is getting a reboot. And because of that reboot, right, it's rekindling that interest in whether they can top what they did back in the early 2000s with the Jessica Alba cast, the Chris Evans cast, and also seeing what they can do with a different stylistic approach to this familiar story. How do they weave the Fantastic Four into this cinematic universe? It seems like at this point, these passing the torch to Anthony Mackie and to Danny Ramirez, who plays Joaquin in this film, it just seemed like they passed the torch on to less charismatic characters, and therefore it didn't really put its hooks in me the way that the originals did, and makes me want them to go back to the beginning again. It makes me want to see a whole new set of characters go through those origin stories again, because those origin stories to me always seem like the most interesting stories for sure. So with that is let me see if I have anything else before I start moving on, and before we start moving on to the Oscars coming up close. Yeah, again, I mean, I just want to reiterate that point too. It's like Marvel really has to kind of figure out and refocus what they want to do with these movies. Because even if you see Star Wars, right? Like Star Wars came out in 1977, but there were 3 films that came out, and then 20 years later when they did the prequels, they asked the viewer to know about 3 films, right? Even when the sequels came out years later, just a couple years ago, you really only needed to know those 3 films. I mean, Marvel expecting people to know there's 23, 24 films now in the cinematic universe, including all the one-offs, including all the TV series. It's a little too much for the viewer to handle in order to get their mind wrapped around this plot, I guess is what I'm saying. And that's the main feeling that I had coming out of Captain America Brave New World was, man, it might be time to just close up shop, lock the door, and start heading to new pastures, because we're really stretching the boundaries of generalized interest when it comes to the viewer's investment. Anyways, when we get back, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll talk a little bit about the 97th Academy Awards. The Oscars are coming up on Sunday at 7 o'clock. And we'll talk a little bit about the movies that are nominated, and we'll make some wild predictions, knowing very, very little. So these are going to be the most uninformed Oscar predictions ever. But who else is better than me to make these predictions? We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to episode 55 of the Powell Not Found Podcast. Episode 55 here for the week of February 28th. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, YouTube at Powell Not Found. And if you have a question for the show, you can email powellnotfound@gmail.com. Again, that's powellnotfound@gmail.com. We're also on all the social channels on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Blue Sky. So we're on all the threads. We're on all the social media platforms, but the main ones are really Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube if you want to follow the show and see some of the archive of the old episodes of the podcast. So go ahead and check those things out when you can, and go ahead and rate, subscribe, leave a comment, do all that kind of stuff. I wanted to kind of wrap up today's show by talking about the Oscars coming up on Sunday at 7 o'clock. It's the annual review of Best Picture, and it's going to be hosted by Conan O'Brien, which is really what's intriguing my interest about watching the Oscars in the first place. For years, I have thought that the Oscars and all of these award shows, whether it's the Golden Globes, the Oscars, the Screen Actors Guild, the Grammys, right? To me, it felt like it was another push, marketing push, to get the people's films and people's products into the zeitgeist again and to give them another shot, right? Specifically, doing this podcast, it feels like it's taken on a different feeling for me, because it's like a annual review of what is good, right? There is so much choice that you have as a viewer that you didn't have in years past, and eventually it's starting to get overwhelming as these platforms start to grow and get bigger and better. Apple TV is starting to become robust with all their television series. Disney Plus is just a huge platform, if not the rival to Netflix right now. These channels have so much content, it almost feels like it's impossible to watch everything, right? Therefore, a curated list of here's something good really is important. But it feels at times that there's so much choice, the tyranny of choice kind of sets in, and you don't watch anything at all because there's so much to choose from. You don't know what to get into. Right now, I'm racing through White Lotus, and that show is very, very funny. Some of the worst people and the worst characters I've ever witnessed, all at a luxury hotel. And if you watch some of the past episodes, we talked about the menu and some of the worst characters and archetypes that you can see. White Lotus has the same kind of vibe, right, in each season. And it kind of follows that arc of that each season is a different cast of characters for the most part. So I'm trying to get to season 3 so we can be current, but catching up on all of this content can be overwhelming. And last year, launching the podcast, I thought that I was going to do a better job of being on top of the zeitgeist when it comes to film. And the baseball season starts, of course, and things start becoming distractions, right? Like, we talk about a variety of things on this podcast. We talk about sports, we talk about movies, we talk about video games. But when you start seeing some of these curated lists come out of the Academy Awards, you start realizing just how much you've missed. Or you start seeing films that are nominated for Best Picture that just never rose to the top. If someone was to ask me what last year's film slate was, I could tell you Wicked and Here, the movie by Tom Hanks that commercially flopped, right? Because those were the things that felt like it broke through in my world, in my media, that really took the world by storm in terms of trying to push, right? It was always Roger Zemeckis is doing another Forrest Gump kind of reunion. Go see this movie. And then Wicked just took over the theater like something I haven't seen really since Star Wars. And it's going to happen again, I think, this year, at the end of the year when Wicked Part 2 comes out, right? There aren't that many movies, I feel like, anymore that really takes over a whole season the way that Wicked did. Like, I felt almost fortunate to get a seat at Wicked the way things were going. It was a Star Wars like event. It was, like we were talking about Marvel, is Marvel-esque, right? So when I look at some of these movies when I look at some of these movies here on the list that's courtesy of the Academy Awards website, one, it's nice for me because I can go back and check out some things. I can put things on the list, but it makes me realize, I'm like, man, I have to do a better job of finding these movies and not relying. And this might be pretty obvious for anybody who actually critically reviews films. I'm not quite sure. But to me, having a knowledge of the production companies that put out films like the A24s, the Searchlight Pictures, those things might be more telling and revealing about what the predictions will be at the end of the year than relying on distribution services like Netflix, like Apple TV or Apple Plus, like Disney Plus, all that kind of stuff. It might give you a better idea of the kind of movies that are coming out, right? When you check out some of the theaters stuff, some of these things I completely missed and blanked seeing them in theaters and giving them a shot. And I feel like everyone has a different gauge of what they're willing to see in the theater, right? A movie like Sing Sing, which is Coleman Domingo is nominated for actor in a leading role, and that movie was about like a theater troupe within a prison that a prisoner was trying to kind of make theater become a bigger thing for the prisoner activities. I feel like a lot of people might wait to see a movie like that just because of the drama that's involved in it, right? They might not want to go to the theater to have that kind of emotional reckoning, if you will, right? It's the same reason why there might be a great horror film that I, might have an interest in, but I don't want to feel scared in a theater seat. So I might not just go to the theater. I might wait until it comes later so that I can kind of set the mood, back in my apartment, back in my home, and then watch it when I want to watch it, as opposed to just kind of following the beats and the pattern of the release season. So when I look back at Best Picture, that's what I want to kind of get to here. If I scroll down, there are so many categories now, which I believe they put back after they kind of took out the other time. So Best Picture, the nominees are Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown. Obviously, that's the Bob Dylan movie that we reviewed here. Conclave, which stars Ralph Fiennes picking a new pope and the scandal in the Vatican. Dune Part 2, Amelia Perez, which I believe was a Netflix film, if I'm not mistaken. I'm Still Here, which I believe is a foreign film. I could be wrong, but I think that's a foreign film. Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. And I got to be honest, when I look at this list here, there are front runners here because there are things that I've seen, and then there are things that I just wouldn't know about unless I was actively seeking them out. Not saying that there aren't good movies. And I think some of the nominations, and maybe they probably do have rigid rules about what can be nominated for a film. Obviously, they have a release window in which it can be nominated. And I think it has to have a theatrical run at some point. That was a big deal when everything started kind of going on demand. But there are certain movies here that, man, unless it was nominated, I still don't know if I would have knowledge of them. Before I came on the show here, I started watching most of the trailers of this movie just to get kind of familiar with what they were about. And a few of them were so experimental. Nickel Boys seems, and I haven't seen it, but it seems like it's filmed in first person. It looks like a video game in that way, right? Which is a very experimental way to film. But Honora, I had no knowledge of. Amelia Perez, I did have knowledge of. The Substance, I had knowledge of. But again, it kind of goes back to a couple things. It's amazing that there's a lot of content, right? It feels like it's hard to keep on track of all this stuff, what the good movies are. And even when you're trying to keep your finger on the pulse, it is hard to do so just because there's so much stuff coming out. So that's a challenge for me in the new year, is to, rely less on the distribution service and try to search out those production companies to see what their big films are and go out and find them, so that by the time the 2025 nominees come out later this year, I'll have more of a knowledge of these movies to pick something accurately. But for now, I want to pick Best Picture prediction, actor in a leading role, actor in a supporting role, actress in a leading role, and actress in a supporting role. I want to do 5 predictions, and I'm going to write them down, and then next week, when we come back, we will review what won and what didn't. And this is purely based on what I've seen, some of the trailers I've seen, and there's no expert knowledge. And I want to reemphasize that for the viewer. There's absolutely no expert knowledge going into these picks that I'm going to predict something. So let's start with actor in a leading role. Actor in a leading role, there are 5 nominees. Adrian Brody for The Brutalist, Timothy Chalamet for A Complete Unknown, Coleman Domingo for Sing Sing, Ralph Fiennes in Conclave, and Sebastian Stan for The Apprentice, which was the Donald Trump movie. And if award season waves mean anything, and I want to say if award season means anything, it seems like they are gearing up to give Timothy Chalamet the best actor in a leading role. His portrayal of Bob Dylan was pretty good. I still maintain that if you give anybody an afro and sunglasses, they become Bob Dylan, and an acoustic guitar. And if you put them and teach them 3 chords, they can become Bob Dylan pretty easily. But even though the movie itself was long, the movie itself was a little bit self-indulgent, I still believe Timothy Chalamet will probably get this award. Ralph Fiennes, I've heard great things about him in Conclave. And Coleman Domingo, even the trailer of seeing Coleman Domingo's performance makes me want to go back and see Sing Sing. But I feel like sometimes the context of the drama of the film can sway maybe vote. And I feel like A Complete Unknown just had such a big marketing swell, especially it being released around Christmas, that I feel like this is an obvious winner. So I'm going to put down for Best Actor, Timothy Chalamet. And I believe he just won the Screen Actors Guild, right? And isn't that the predictor of whoever wins the Screen Actors Guild tends to win the Oscar? I could be wrong. Let's go to actor in a supporting role. They have 5 nominees: Yura Borisov, Kieran Culkin, A Real Pain. Yura Borisov in Anora, Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain, Edward Norton, A Complete Unknown, Guy Pearce in The Brutalist, and Jeremy Strong in The Apprentice. I believe Kieran Culkin won the Screen Actors Guild Award. I saw the acceptance speech for him circulating online. My pick, though, again, I'm going to go with what I know in this particular case. I think Ed Norton, he's probably going to take this award. I predict a complete sweep for A Complete Unknown for at least the actor side of this award. So that's where I'm going with my heart. I'm just going to write it down. Ed Norton. There we go. Let's go third up, and then we'll wrap up the show. Third up, actress in a leading role: Cynthia Erivo in Wicked, Carla Sofia Gascon. I'm probably butchering these pronunciations, but for Amelia Perez, Mikey Madison in Honora, Demi Moore in The Substance, Fernanda Torres in I'm Still Here. I think this is low and away the easiest prediction of the night that we have. I mean, Cynthia Erivo's performance in Wicked was captivating, and for someone who had never seen Wicked before, as a musical theater person too, that's a huge miss. Because generally when you're hanging out with theater kids, especially in college and, in high school and stuff, you tend to know, and Wicked comes up quite a bit. The music of it comes up quite a bit, and did come up quite a bit. It was a thing that was put on by a lot of different schools and a lot of different performances at the time. The range that she portrayed in that role was very, very interesting. And I think it's hard to kind of stand out from that kind of spectacle. We talked a little bit about it in the review, but her performance of that character going from start to finish, and really start to middle because it's split up into 2 parts. But once we see this completed arc from Cynthia Erivo, I feel like she's going to blow us away just from what the character begins as and what the character ends as. It's the Walter White. It's the transformation that he has in Breaking Bad. It is the Michael Corleone transformation from good guy to bad guy. I think once we see that whole thing complete, I think we're going to realize just how powerful that performance is. I don't think she's going to win in my heart. I think it's probably going to go to somebody else here on this list. But if I was to pick a prediction, it would be Cynthia Erivo for Wicked. And so I'm writing it down. 2 more here. We've got actress in a supporting role. We've got Monica Barbera, A Complete Unknown, Ariana Grande for Wicked, Felicity Jones in The Brutalist, Isabella Rossellini in Conclave, and Zoe Saldana in Amelia Perez. Now, I would give it to Monica Barbera because I know on Complete Unknown. She played Joan Baez in A Complete Unknown, and she was great as that character. I do believe the hype around Amelia Perez. I do believe that Zoe Saldana will get it, and I'm just basing that on the Oscar hype and predictions that I've seen out there. I think she's going to probably get that actress in a supporting role. And even though in my heart I would like it to go to Monica, because I think her portrayal of Joan Baez really did carry that film. She was the emotional crux of that film. But it will probably go over to Amelia Perez. So I'm going to go take a rogue pick, one that I don't know. I got to go watch that film, but this is my risky pick. And then for Best Picture, let's see. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pictures for Best Picture. So Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Amelia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. There is a part of me that feels like films like The Brutalist, Conclave, Amelia Perez, experimental movies like The Substance, Nickel Boys, right? I'm Still Here, which again I believe is a foreign film, right? I think the representation of this list is very wide and varied. I think a couple misses might have been in, it was a box office flop, but I thought Here was very, very, very impressive. What Robert Zemeckis did with the de-aging and showing a film from one perspective, I thought clearly should have had a nomination for Best Picture, but I'm not in control of the vote. So I think that's a big miss here because I still think that was one of the better films in 2024. But if I were to guess, I don't think you can ignore the cultural touchstone that was Wicked last year. I don't think you can do it. And that might just be marketing talking. That might just be the fact that it was just in our face the entire time. But if we're talking about, and again, I don't quite know what Best Picture, what the qualifications for Best Picture. Are we just talking about the best fine filmmaking there is? Or are we just talking about just in general what we thought the Best Picture is? I don't know if you can walk away from that list and say that Wicked didn't have its hooks in everybody and give it to something else and walk away feeling like you really truthfully gave it to the Best Picture. So I'm putting down Wicked, and those are my predictions. So again, before we go into Sunday night, and again, Sunday night hosted by Conan O'Brien, my predictions are Best Actor goes to Timothée Chalamet, Actor in a Supporting Role, Ed Norton, Cynthia Erivo for Best Actress, Actress in a Supporting Role, Zoe Saldana for Amelia Perez, and Best Picture going to Wicked. I'm going to put this to review for next week, and then we'll contrast and compare, and then hopefully if something else wins, I'll see if I can try to view that movie before I come on next week. I am very, very interested to see what Conan does with the hosting job of the Academy Awards. If you remember 10 years ago, he hosted the Emmys. It's got to be 14 years ago or something like that at this point. But he hosted the Emmys, and he had this huge cold open that involved him going through a whole bunch of different TV shows and sets and stuff. And it was remarkable. Conan, when he's hosting these things, usually has a huge musical number accompanying him. He's done the Music Man on stage for one of these awards shows in the past. So just his penchant for being wacky and crazy and seems to suit this show, and it's probably going to give it a lightness that it probably didn't have with previous hosts. So I'm excited to see him. He was my comedy hero growing up, and so I'm very, very interested to see him put on the show, because whenever he does host something, it always ends up having some sort of wackiness that's fueled by his great writing crew, Mike Sweeney, Jesse Gaskell, and Matt O'Brien and stuff like that. His crew just seems to reflect a very, very relatable show for everybody. So I cannot wait for his whatever they've come up with here for this year. And obviously we've had some and how they're going to kind of address not only the things that happened in LA this year, earlier this year with the LA fires, but also they've recently, with Gene Hackman has died, Michelle Trachtenberg has died. So seeing them address some of these things that have happened recently to this community and weave it to the show, it should be very, very interesting to see. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, this is the third time we've been doing this show live. I got a little thrown off in the beginning just because I wasn't expecting chats to kind of come in. So hopefully this show is going to be one where I rev back into it slowly and get used to it. So again, this is the Powell Not Found podcast. Thank you guys for joining me live here on the show. Hopefully as we do these things live going forward, it's just going to get smoother and better as we go. Go ahead and follow us on all the social channels. That's TikTok, Threads. I did all the lists before, but you know all the social channels. And most importantly, go to the YouTube channel. That's YouTube at Powell Not Found, and subscribe, ring the bell, do all the things. Make the show grow, and comment with the things that you'd like to see coming up next on the content that we post. And most importantly, have a good weekend. Go outside, enjoy the nice weather, and I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.
Track of the days. So she's been dancing to the music blaring from the Renegade, and in the morning she lays with the memories departed of heavy college weeks, bookended with long trips to Busch Gardens. It was like those hockey games with no time on the clock. By the time she turned her head, the Caps had won the cup. But there's no contagion or disease, no stop us from singing.